What's going on in the chat room? Yes, the hair is gone, but I'm not bald. Um, Everyone always says, "Oh, you're bald." No, I'm not. I just cut it short. I like it cut close to the grain. Makes it more manageable. Don't have to deal with it. I'm a guy. I don't want to be spending more than a minute fixing, like, messing with my hair. What's up, Lyman? Man, you came on quick. I got the lo-fi in the background, the pop culture lo-fi. It's mostly from anime music, and I have some uh, iced coffee. Uh, I need to find the straw though. And yes, this is another dingy green shirt I'm wearing. Ow! Just hit my knee. Um, there's so many things in here. Um, Let me get comfy, and we're gonna get into today's subject. With no further ado, this is continuing from the subject from last week when I got into a contentious debate with a few people over morality, particularly one person who came into the chat, and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm spending like 40 minutes trying to explain to him my viewpoint, which is nuance. Unfortunately, people who don't do philosophy don't understand nuance or can't do nuance, which is the very reason they don't do philosophy in the first place. You can't do philosophy without nuance. Like if you can only think in terms of black and white, then philosophy is not your stick. Stick to something easy. Do criminal justice or communications. I'm doing well, thank you. What's going on over there? Sorry, iced coffee moment. Um, Shout out to Flutterby if she's there. So the funny thing is, I actually agreed mostly with the guy, but I gave him reasons why we shouldn't be too readily acceptable of all the arguments coming out of contemporary ethicists arguing for moral relativity because there are um, there was some considerations coming out of moral psychology and bioethics and um, moral research showing that it, it wasn't that clear cut. Plus, there's a plethora of arguments dating all the way back to the pre the before Socrates talking about morality, both secular and religious, that point to that argue for some objectivity and ethics. Uh, are they all convincing? No, I'm not arguing that those arguments are convincing. Like the most convincing arguments have been the ethicists who've argued that morality is mostly relative. Oh, no problem, Lyman. You don't have to say when you leave in a comment. Just do your thing. All right. I won't. It's not rude on your part. You don't have to say when you're going and coming back. Just we all live busy lives. Just drop in when you can. Give me a like. Come back in when you have the time. That's cool with me. But I got a call. I don't know if you guys can hear it buzzing, but I don't want it to decline because then the person knows that I actually answered it and declined it. I'd rather them just not know I answered it. Plus, I hate when people just call me without. Don't just call someone without telling them first, hey, are you free? You just call. Like, this is 2024. People don't like just random calls. And I'm Gen X, so if I'm Gen X and I'm saying it, you know the millennials and Gen Z hate it. I'm Gen X and I hate it. So I understand. I completely understand. But if you don't call someone first, make sure they're free before you just assume they're free to chat. Especially because everyone does everything from their phone. So if someone's trying to watch a video, if someone's in the middle of texting someone, if someone's in the middle of looking at something online, they don't want to just stop what they're doing to pick up a call. It's inconvenient. Unless and only unless it's business related and I'm expecting it. But again, you gotta give people notice before the call. Appreciate your sentiment, West Cruz, but that was a conversation. That was a topic for the previous day. I've moved on. However, I mean, I get your sentiments though, so don't think I'm dismissing you. But if you want to like change the topic from what the current topic is, I always ask people drop me either a super sticker or a super donation, and I'll be more than happy to divert the topic to whatever you're addressing. But if you're not going to drop like a super sticker or a super donation, then I'm just going to stick to the topic at hand. But appreciate it though. Um, Anywho, so guys, so like I said, I got into this heated debate with someone. At first, it wasn't even a debate. I thought that it was just a matter of me explaining my viewpoint to this person, and then they got upset from their lack of understanding, which is funny. Just shows that person wasn't very smart. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If someone's not very smart, I'm just going to say it. Like, if I'm taking 40 minutes out of my time at 3 a.m., mind you, to explain my position in which I've already explained through a live stream for like the past 3 hours, I think the failure to understand is on his part, not on mine. And so then I even did a second live stream where I spent the first 20 minutes of that live stream like basically rehashing what happened in that previous stream. Then I moved on to the next thing. So this is my second attempt to do that, where instead of me just talking about moral topics in general, I'm just going to address this one particular issue. Okay. And this one particular issue is talking about whether morality is subjective. And there's been a variety of viewpoints on this. And people are going to say, well, no one's in the chat. Why are you even talking about this? Because people watch this on the replay, my friends. People watch this on the replay. And I get my videos are monetized on the replay as well. So it makes sense to keep talking, even if no one's here to agree or disagree or counter or critique or whatever. Don't care. So if you came here just to talk about Trump, you should probably look at the topic before you jump. I don't understand how people are confused about that when they come in thinking they're going to talk about whatever they want. And I clearly have a topic when you click the video, when you click the live stream, it clearly says that the topic. But anyway, so this person decided to insult me because he didn't understand my viewpoint when he was saying, well, morality can't be objective because of X, Y, and Z. And every point that he made was something that I've already addressed several times. And then I addressed it to him as well. So we were spinning our wheels. So because of his failure to get it, he wanted to insult me. I banned him. And then he came back under several usernames. Unfortunately, when I'm doing a mobile live stream, this in this vertical format, when I ban a username, it doesn't ban the IP address. Now, if I did this on a PC live stream version, on a desktop version, then when I ban someone, it bans their IP address. It doesn't just ban their username. So unfortunately, you have trolls that will come back under multiple usernames just because they have nothing else better to do, which shows you're kind of a loser. Which he was. Instead of just moving on and saying, "All right, I'm not going to deal with this live stream anymore," he wants to keep coming back under different usernames. Like, what kind of loser are you? Like, move on. It shows that some of these people have no social skills whatsoever today, and I'm pretty sure he's under the age of 30 to sit there and talk on a point in which he has no academic background and think he has something meaningful to say. No, you don't. Like, sorry to break it to people who don't know this, but philosophy is an actual academic discipline in which there is a curriculum, in which there are certain concepts that you need to learn, in which there are certain skills you need to utilize to be able to practice it. For one, you need to learn logic. Even in continental philosophy, well, at least some continental philosophy, you still have to learn logic, even though continental philosophy itself is more bound on literature and literary criticism and social movements, whereas analytic philosophy, which is the main discipline within most English-speaking countries, analytic philosophy not only requires a background in logic, but um, it has a it has it, the way to do it is that you must exhibit the the, the ability to be clear, cogent, and concise. I'll put it that way. And instead of there being a background steeped in literature or literary criticism and social movements, um, analytic philosophy sees itself as being continuous with science and uses the tool of um, conceptual or logical analysis, or well, I'll say conceptual or linguistic analysis as one of its main tools. So whereas continental philosophy is more continuous with literature and sometimes certain social movements of the left, analytic philosophy, which is also can be on the left or right depending on the philosopher and what they're into, uh, sees itself more continuous with the sciences. So both the empirical and formal sciences, that is. So back to where I'm talking about with morality being subjective. So there's been different viewpoints, morality being subjective. There's ethical subjectivism, obviously. There's emotivism. Emotivism is a type of uh, moral relativism where they basically argue that that moral statements are basically someone's expressing their emotional viewpoints on a given state of affairs, but outside of that has no objective reality. So for them to say that something is immoral or that's bad or something like that is just them expressing their distaste for a certain state of affairs. They have a point. That they certainly have a point with that, but I think it's more to it than that. But this has been a viewpoint in early 20th century of analytic philosophy, particularly of those of the people called logical positivists. Let me change the chat filter here and make sure I'm getting all my people here, all my chat room folks. There we go. So I see three people lurking in the background. Don't be afraid to say hello if you want. If not, that's cool as well. But please leave me a like if you're lurking there in the background. And this chat has been brought to you by Iced Coffee. Uh, some nice, I think espresso coffee put some creamer, a little bit of cinnamon and sugar. Really good. So, like I said, we talk about ethical subjectivism, which is basically like all moral statements are subjective, in which, in other words, they have no no truth value. Then there's emotivism, which is a different variety of that, which is that moral statements or moral assertions just express a person's opinion on a given state of affairs. Um, there's another thing called ethical egoism. So there's a thing called psychological egoism, which is just a fact of a fact of the matter that people do often do things within their own self-interest. Not self, which is different from saying they're being selfish. Doing something within your self-interest is not necessarily selfish. So, um, applying for a job. What's up, Lyman? No, no, no problem at all. So, applying for a job would be a act of self-interest. It's not selfish. It's self-interest because you're doing it for your own interest, right? Um, Even though there's limited positions for that very job position, that doesn't make you selfish. That just shows self-interest, as you should, as a rational person should be. What would the difference between self-interest and selfish would be you not only applying for that job, but you making sure no one else can get it. That's selfish. Like you actually going out of your way to block other potential applicants. That would be selfish. But merely applying to the job itself, even though there's a limited position available for it, is not selfish itself. It's just self-interest. That's psychological egoism. Psychological egoism is individuals looking out for their own self-interest. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that people then made it into an ethical theory within meta ethics, saying that the moral thing to do is to act in your own self-interest. That's a bit subjective, and I don't, and obviously you don't have to know Kant's categorical imperative to understand that everyone acting in their own self-interest wouldn't always work out to be the most ethical way to behave. Obviously, it doesn't take too many vivid examples to see how that can go astray, right? I would think. So that's ethical egoism. And there's another ethical theory starting with E. These are called the three E's of ethical theory, and all of them are considered shit theories in ethics. So again, emotivism, um, ethical egoism, and we're going to the third one, existentialism. Lyman says people have lost their morals. Yes and no. We're going to get to that though. We can get to that. Let me finish this, and I'll jump right into that. Um, so the third E of the three E's of ethical theories, which all fail, is existentialism. So existentialism is a wide-spanning philosophical topic that borders not on just ethical theory, but also on issues dealing with um, metaphysics as far as like we're talking about freedom of will versus determinism and sort of stuff like that. So not going to talk about that part of existentialism. We're just going to concentrate on the part of it as being seen as an ethical theory. So from the existentialist point of view, they agree with nihilists that there's no purpose to life, and most people in philosophy would have to agree with that, even if they're reluctant to do so. They have to kind of agree that, yeah, outside of taking it on faith, there's really no reasons to believe that there's a purpose to life. So that part is true that the nihilists assert. The part that people disagree with the nihilists is saying that from there, um, it doesn't matter what you do. So you can go off and be a complete social miscreant, or you can be a saint. It doesn't matter. Doesn't Nothing matters. So the so just because you know they think that antecedent justifies the consequent in that hypothetical statement, that hypothetical syllogistic argument, right? I don't want to get into the different types of forms of arguments, but that's one of them, a hypothetical syllogism, where if A is tr- if A is true, then B must be true. Mm, but that's an invalid form of argument. That's not a valid hypothetical syllogism. But we'll have to go into all of that. Um, the antecedent is true, but the consequent of that argument isn't. So yeah, there's no purpose of life, but doesn't mean that from there it follows necessarily that nothing else you do, how you behave, matters. It does. So the existentialists disagree with the nihilists as well. They say, well, that means you have freedom of choice. And for them, the ethical thing to do is always what what makes the individual free. And there's different ways the existentialists express this ethical theory of theirs, but obviously there's problems with that, and that seems pretty subjective as well. That basically the ethical thing to do is exercise your freedom of choice. Again, we don't have to imagine too many examples where that can go astray. So the three E's of the ethical theories are both a bit subjective, and they don't work if we want to ensure actual moral behavior. Um, and the three E's again, to summarize: emotivism, which was very popular, like I said, in the early 20th century analytic philosophy, especially amongst the logical positivists who later became the logical empiricists. And then the ethical egoism, which took a psychological fact and tried to turn it into a an ethical theory, because they committed what's called the is ought fallacy, or some also called the naturalistic fallacy, which is the fallacy committed when you take a fact of the matter of something that is, and then turn it into something that ought to be. That's the is ought fallacy, or naturalistic fallacy. And then there's the third one, existentialism, which takes from the fact that there being no meaning to life, that our freedom of choice dictates our ethical decisions. None of these work. So they're the three E's of ethics that fail. And then, of course, outside of the three E's, there's the granddaddy of them all, which is ethical subjectivism, um, which just basically states there's no truth value to any ethical statements. Um, Whether you do X, Y, or Z, or you do A, B, or C, doesn't matter. And it does matter, obviously, but we're going to get into why. But first, I want to address what Lyman says. He says people have lost their morals. I don't think people have lost their morals, Lyman. I think the problem is we all have basic moral instincts, and this is what I was trying to argue in the previous live streams last week, and I'm going to get into that. We all have these innate moral instincts, but they're expressed differently amongst us. However, some of us can choose to ignore those moral instincts as well. Unfortunately, we all like um, normal psychologically functioning people have these same innate moral instincts, but they might be expressed differently within our cultures, and some of us may choose to ignore them. That's the problem. Also, our sphere, then also there's a sphere of moral behavior that we don't extend to all people. I think people haven't lost their morals. I think people actually are acting more, behaving more morally than they have in previous time periods in history. The reason I believe that and that there's evidence for it is that it seems that people have enlarged their sphere of morality to include more and more people outside of their own in group. We know that there's a such thing in psychology and then other social research called in group bias, which we also sometimes call tribalism, which is that, people who are within our own group we consider an extension of ourselves, and people who fall outside of that group we consider them others and don't have and we don't consider that they need to be treated in a behavioral in a moral fashion in which we would treat people within our own in group, which is in group bias. um, However, as time has gone on, we've expanded people more and more outside of our initial in group to be included within our sphere of morality. It started from the family, to the clan, to the tribe, you know, to our race, to the our nation, and then even to people globally. For some people, um, but you always notice there's more altruism towards the people most like us, even though we include expanded our spheres of morality. Um, but there's still more work to do on that, obviously. And like even in some of the best moral theories, they have been failings in that, like Kantian ethical theory, which is called de- deontological theory. Deontological theory is just a fancy way of saying duty-based ethics. That the way you make ethical decisions is based on your duty to how you treat one another. And Kant was one of the biggest proponents of duty-based ethics, or deontologicalism. Sorry. Um, it started with his so-called categorical imperative, which I would try to give a definition of, but he literally reworked that categorical imperative like dozens, if not hundreds of times, because each time he tried it, it it had limitations that he had to reconfigure. But he himself was flawed in that, because even within his duty-based ethics system of um, the categorical imperative that you must treat people as an ends in themselves and not as a means to an ends, and that you can and that you if something you do can't be universalized, that everyone can do it, then it's not ethical. Even with that, he he limited that ethical treatment only to basically Europeans and celestial figures. So he basically said that, so outside of like European people, if you were not European, or if you were not a celestial being, which means either like um, an angel or an alien, you did not count. You you could be treated however people wanted to treat them, because they fall out of the sphere of ethical treatment, because they're not considered human, more or less. Well, basically people who weren't European or celestial figures weren't rational beings, and hence only rational beings needed to be treated ethically. So he So that was his way of discounting people who were who were indigenous to other countries, or people who were black or Asian. Like he and then he had degrees of rationality. Like obviously the black ones were of the least rationality to him. The indigenous people of America had limited rationality, and the Asians had more rationality in their proximity to being European like. So the more European like he found them, the more he found they have the capacity for rationality, and hence to be included within his sphere of ethical treatment. So luckily we have moved beyond uh, Immanuel Kant's flawed view of anthropology. So it's not that people have lost their morals; it's that they we just have more work to do. Now back to the considerations of last week. So again, I agree that yes, morality seems mostly relative, but I made a distinction between domain relative and complete relativity. That's the way this guy didn't get it. I was saying there are some domains that might be domain relative, but may not be like completely relative. The difference is with domain relativity is that within their own sphere, there is like some objectivity, and I say morality is one of those cases. So there's things that are just completely relative, like people's personal taste. That's an example of complete relativity. Like your personal preferences for what you like to eat or whatever, completely relative. Art is another contentious one. I think art is actually more contentious than morality, but most people consider art completely relative, where there's a lot of people in art and literary criticism that don't. They are considered ethicists, which is the philosophical viewpoint that there is a objective viewpoint on what can be considered art, music, and literature. But I guess the trick is actually stating that actual those what those aesthetic principles actually are. We don't have to get into that, but we can say that art may be another domain relative subject where within its own sphere there is some objectivity, but outside of it, it may be relative. So, of course, I know there might be some people out there saying you're a Philistine, that personal taste isn't completely subjective either. I disagree. I think personal taste is one of the most textbook examples of complete subjectivity. Um, the law is relative. That's another thing. We don't have to go into a discussion on the law. But the law, by virtue of 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 its subject, is relative for obvious reasons. It has to be relative to that society for it to work. So anyway, getting back to domain relativity. So what is the objective part of morality if it is domain relative? What is the part within morality that can be considered objective? Well, the first point is that we all have universal moral instincts that are innate. That's where I was arguing with this guy. He was trying to battle over words, and I don't think he was either he wasn't carefully choosing his words or he just literally didn't know what he was saying. I'm going to assume after that argument that we had after 40 minutes of explanation, it's going to just assume the latter, that he literally didn't know the words he was choosing. But the reason why I would say morality might be quasi-objective is we have these universal moral instincts which are innate. And when I say they are innate, meaning they seem to either be present at birth or happen or to be developed very much after birth, because we can test children in developmental studies through labs where we can see how young toddlers or infants react to certain situations that may be of a moral nature. That's one clue that is innate. Um, Another is looking at twin versus adoption studies, where you take siblings who are either twins versus siblings who are adopted. And the twin studies can be of two types. You have twins who are raised together versus twins who are raised apart. And so you can figure out what the stuff that they do that's similar, is it something that is innate or something that was learned? And then with adoption studies, you compare siblings versus biological siblings versus adopted siblings. Because with adopted siblings, any similarity will just be due to their childhood upbringing as opposed to anything genetic. So this is how we tease things apart. The twin studies, twins raised together versus twins raised apart, and studies that of siblings versus who are biological siblings versus adopted siblings. And then there's cross-cultural research. Cross-cultural research goes and uh, does research where they look at people from uh, different cultures across the globe, including uh, pre-industrial societies. There are still several pre-industrial societies around the globe, like the Amazonian groups in South America, some pre-industrial societies in parts of the Indian subcontinent, pre-industrial societies in Southeast Asia, like the people of the Aita in the Philippines, or the people who live in parts of Indonesia and the Pacific Islands, and in remote parts of Asia. So we do these studies comparing modern societies versus pre-industrial societies, and Eastern versus Western societies, and we see that everyone has these same universal taboos. Now, those taboos are expressed differently in each culture. Like there's every culture has a different scope on what they include within those taboos and what doesn't fit within those taboos, but they all have those same taboos, which are taboos against unaliving people, against um, sexually assaulting them, against robbing them, against being dishonest, against um, uh, um, take against incest and stuff like that. These are all universal taboos across societies, across all societies. So you gather that together, all this evidence, this becomes converging evidence. So this is important in behavioral research. When you have converging evidence, that is, you're getting similar results from different types of research all pointing to the same conclusion, that makes that conclusion so much stronger, and confirms that it's probably true. That's converging evidence. So you're getting converging evidence from all these different sorts of research that we have innate universal moral instincts. Similar in vein to how we know we now have innate universal grammar, which was something pointed out by Noam Chomsky um, over 50 years ago. That we have a universal moral grammar that is innate. That is, that we have innate principles of learning language. So, and there's a neuroscientist that actually argues prolifically on this matter called Moral Minds. If people want to know more about the subject, they can pick up that book, Moral Minds, and I believe the neuroscientist's name is Mark Hauser, Marc Hauser, Hauser. I believe that's the name of the author, but it's called Moral Minds. I have the book. I think I have two of them. So I bought I bought two of them by accident. I had already bought one, then didn't realize I already had one, and bought another one when I was living somewhere else. That's fine. Two is having two of the same books is always a good thing to have if it's a good book. But so that was my point back then of why I said morality isn't just utterly relative, because there was some quasi objectivity coming from this ethical research. Not only that, there's a more um, there's another philosophical principle at hand that would lead to us thinking that it's not completely relative, which is if if there's a lot of disagreement on a subject, that sort of points to it not being completely relative, because where there's no rational disagreement to be had, this probably subjective. Like, we can argue over who's the most powerful superheroes and stuff like that, but eh, it's kind of relative, right? I mean, it's no rational agreement to be had over that outside of the very characteristics of those fictional characters in the first place. So similar to religion, this is why some people aren't religious. What's up, BSK? But yeah, so like when you talk about fictional characters and who can beat up who, this is completely subjective. Now, within the confines of those actual like fictional universe, then yeah, there might be some. I guess there can be some um, fictional objectivity, but outside of that itself, no. Um, People want to say Mickey Mouse can beat up Bugs Bunny, whatever, right? I hope people get what I'm saying on that one. But yeah, so I've talked enough. I've pretty much explained my viewpoint on that. So I'm open to what people may think. And if people don't have any strong opinions on it, then I just end this. Rand says, I think there are a common set of morals that all humans share. I think they fit the basic needs of a human being. Yeah, so this gets into my own moral view, which is social contractarianism. There's many different versions of social contractarianism. Mine is more predicated on the version espoused by the late philosopher John Rawls. John Rawls was such a prolific political philosopher. He actually made political philosophy an actual like respectable topic within philosophy again, because up until John Rawls back in the like I guess the 80s and 90s, people didn't really take political philosophy seriously anymore in analytic philosophy. Maybe they still talked about it in continental Europe philosophy, but in analytic philosophy, like political philosophy, was pretty much a dead subject. He made it relevant again, so much so that people who go to law school, and if I don't know if I've had any law students or lawyers or paralegals in the chat, but who might watch this on the replay, but you can testify to probably hearing about John Rawls and his theory of justice as fairness in law school. Probably taking a class on that, on um, political ethics or something, or the philosophy of law. I took philosophy of law as well. But yeah, that gets into social contractarianism. Social contractarianism kind of agrees with moral relatives, saying, hey, yeah, sure, for the most part, morals are relative, right? Um, but it also takes lessons from Kantian ethics or duty based ethics, deontological theory, which is that we still have to learn how to reason about uh, ethical behavior in order to have a a cohesive society, because it's these unwritten laws of society which allows a, a harmonious, peaceful existence with other human beings. And when people break the social contract, this is how we know that there is a social contract itself, because things fall into chaos. Uh, Grant says, I think the Bible is a guide to these morals in order to have a better functioning society. I disagree with that, actually. So, I've talked about this in the previous live stream too. So, yes, a lot of people do base their morals on their religious convictions. And in ethics, this is called the divine command theory. How the problem with divine command theory goes all the way back to Socrates himself, who exposed why it doesn't work. Is what's just uh, what the gods like, or is what's just um, whatever, you know? So yeah, so it becomes like this: is what's ethical or what is good, um, whatever the gods decide, or is what's good um, something there which the gods then tell us to do. And it becomes an important difference. So if it's whatever the gods like, then morality becomes completely subjective to whatever the whims of the deities are, whoever those deities may be. However, if it's something, if if the good is something that exists that then the gods tell us to do, then we don't need the gods to tell us what is moral. It's already objective and exists outside of the gods, the deities themselves. Um, and so being like if this distinction becomes important, because if morality is just whatever the gods like, then they can tell us to do something that's uh, completely against our moral instincts, like to go complete murder and mayhem, pillage, rave, rove, and all those sorts of things, which in different religious texts, like the Bible, has happened in the Old Testament. Yahweh often commanded the Israelites to do heinous acts as if he was some mob boss, saying, "I want you to wipe out this entire tribe of people." And then he was mad at them when the Israelites spared some of them. They spared the children and women as slaves. He said, "No, I didn't tell you to spare some of these people as women as slaves. I told you to eliminate all of them." Like when they were basically, conquering Canaan and its subsidiary territories. Like there was moments in the Old Testament, he was like, "No, I told you to wipe all of them out. I didn't tell you to save some of them for slaves. He said, no, wipe them all out. And so he punished them for not wiping them all out. That's not moral. I would argue that's not moral. We saw this in the Game of Thrones in the sixth season of Game of Thrones. He's like she was a girl. She was just a little girl, and you burned her at the stake. Why? Because your God commanded you to do so. He said, if your God commands you to burn a child at the stake, your God is evil. And I agree with that. That's why divine command theory doesn't work. So, Grant says, fake virtue brings altered morality. Democrats are the prime example of that. Well, yes, but both sides do it. And I don't want to feed into the whole both sideism, but this is why most people who know a lot about politics are politically apathetic. A lot of journalists, uh, political journalists who work like on Capitol Hill and within the Washington Beltway, most of them are politically apathetic because they know both parties, which are both owned by the donor class, do the same things, but they only call it a foul when the other side does it. They both do it. This is why I'm an independent. I don't think you can. I think it's very. I don't. I think it's very difficult to think critically about politics if you're partisan because you'll you're more inclined to dismiss things that your own party does while calling out when the other side does it. This is why I'm not. This is why I'm nonpartisan. BSK says Old Testament significant violence harsh. Yeah, it was. Grant says never watched it. LOL disagree. God is love and wrath. Again, the wrath, is that necessary though? That's what I'm saying. Why is wrath necessary? Why would a perfect being make imperfect objects and then punish them for it? That doesn't make sense. But I'm not getting into, I don't want to criticize anyone's faith. My point is the divine command theory is not a good ethical theory in which to make ethical decisions. That's my point. Grant says also disagree. Democrats have made a religion out of doublethink. Sure, but have not Republicans done so in the past? What was Bush's whole compassionate conservatism? or the neoliberalism that came into rise under Ronald Reagan? Now, ever since Reagan, neoliberalism has become the religion of politics, both on the left and the right. This is why this is why outsiders are so ill treated within the political establishment, because the establishment is neoliberalism, which came into prominence under Ronald Reagan in the early 80s. No matter whether you're talking about establishment Democrats or establishment Republicans, they're all neoliberals. Whereas outsiders like Bernie Sanders or outsiders like Donald Trump rebuked that neoliberal agenda, which is why they were so hated amongst their own political parties when they first came into prominence in the 2016 election. Grant says yes, because evil exists. Well, again, that's a spiritual concept. Evil. We have no way of quantifying evil. What we can say as a matter, what we can objectively say is that human suffering and misery exists due to the behavior of others. But to say good or evil is a matter is completely subjective. And saying there's no better theory, again, no. It's been pointed out over 2,500 years ago by by Socrates and his students like Plato and later his student Aristotle. The divine command theory doesn't work. It's never worked. If everything that's moral is based on the whims of a god, then they can command you to do something completely against our moral instincts, but be considered moral just because they said so. And this ends up being just the whims of a religious leader who's usually someone of a narcissistic and psychopathic tendencies. Um, Telling people to murder, to crate, to rape, and other stuff in the name of your deity is wrong. It's wrong. And like I said, that was so well stated in Game of Thrones in season 6 when uh, in the battle coming from the north, when they tried to retake Winterfell, they all were destroyed, and to to try to try to please the Lord of Light, they burned the princess at the stake, thinking it would gain them favor with the Lord of Light and ensure them victory over their victors. And that didn't work. And on top of it not working, even if it did work, it wasn't worth the cost of burning that little girl at the stake, who was a precious little girl. And like he said, if your God tells you to burn a girl at a stake, your God is evil. This is why divine command theory doesn't work. If your God tells you to do something that we know goes against our innate moral instincts, that God is that God is a bad God. Don't follow him. And the Old Testament is full of points where Yahweh instructed the Israelites to do heinous things in his name, and he punished them when they didn't do it. So divine command theory doesn't work. He said, "Can you quote the Bible where we were instructed to kill the little girl?" That no, I said Game of Thrones, Grant. I didn't say that was in the. I didn't say that was in the Bible. I said in the Bible are instances where the Israelites were told to murder different tribes within Canaan and the subsidiary territories to reclaim Canaan as their own, as their promised land. They were told to murder different tribes of people. Guys, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I've read the Bible back and forth. I've been to church like the rest of you have. All of us know these stories where the where Yahweh commanded these Israelites to clear out these cities. And when they didn't do that to his specification, they were punished for it. When they instead decided not to completely kill every single person in that in that city, but took some of them as child slaves and as wives, they were punished severely for it. That is evil. That's wrong, so to speak. And again, I was referencing Game of Thrones season 6. I said that 4 times already. So I was saying that is an example of why divine command theory doesn't work. Because if whatever is good is whatever your God commands, he can command you to do bad things or good things, and and for him it's no difference. But on the flip side, if what is good exists outside of the gods and they tell you to do what is already something that exists outside of them, which is good, then you don't need the gods to know what is good. So you get you get X or Y. X is morality comes through the whims of the gods. Y is what is good exists and therefore the gods command you to do it. So what is good doesn't we can directly access what is good, and the gods just become the middle person. We're just saying the commandments are written. I'm not getting into a religious discussion. The point is divine command theory doesn't work. Anyone who's taken ethics 101 knows this. This is not a very this is not a very hard subject. It's very this is this is baby ethics. Baby ethics you learn divine command theory doesn't work. I don't have to read the 10 commandments. I know them. Actually, as people only say 10 commandments in the Torah, it's actually like 214 commandments or whatever. So it does not fit humanity because it's at the whims of a God's uh, fit, uh, mental fit at the time. You said murder is bad, stealing is bad. Again, you're missing the point and you're being willfully ignorant of what I'm saying. So I'm moving on. I'm just not gonna address it anymore. You're being willfully ignorant. There are stories in the Bible and people will be when they watch this on replay know exactly what I'm talking about. There are several instances in the Old Testament where God told the Israelites to completely wipe people out. Completely wipe them out. Sometimes they did, and they were rewarded by him, and sometimes they didn't do it to his specifications, and they were punished for it. Yahweh acted as a mob boss through most of the Old Testament. You didn't get a softer side of Yahweh up until you got to the times of David, the Davidian kings, the line of Davidian kings. This is why some people often argue that there's actually three different gods within the Bible. There's the there's the God of Moses, which acts as a mob boss. There's the Davidian God, which has more compassion. And then there's in the New Testament, Jesus is the Son, shows more love and compassion. So some people see this as three different conceptions of God in the Bible. Some people say they're just three separate gods altogether. I'm not going to go into that because I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not a theologian. I'm not going to make one argument one way or the other. But the books, the books attributed to Moses, he acts as a mob boss, and you don't see a more compassionate side to Yahweh until you get to the 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 Psalms of David and all that sort of stuff. In any case, divine command theory fails as a good ethical theory. Period. I'm not going to name a culture where murder and stealing are, because if you listen to my stream for the last 30 minutes, I've already explained that every culture has the same taboos. Divine command theory doesn't work. I'm moving on. Can someone else come up in a discussion? Because I'm not going to keep addressing the same thing over and over again. So to get the subject back on foot, I'm just going to recap what I said earlier in the live stream since some people weren't here. I argued that this is an extension of previous live streams from last week when I was trying to explain to someone why there is some quasi objectivity to morality that is not completely moral, that is not completely relative, although there's a good argument that it is based on on converging evidence coming from different lines of research, right? I said that there has been research coming from developmental studies dealing with infants and toddlers, showing them reacting to different hypothetical situations that are show that they have an innate understanding of basic morality. And then there's also studies in which we do things like twin studies. Twin studies uh, compares twins raised apart from those raised together. And then you have the sibling versus adoption studies where you test siblings who are biological siblings versus siblings who are adopted. Uh, then you also have um, cross-cultural research showing cultural taboos that are similar across every society in both modern societies and pre-industrial societies, and in Western societies versus Eastern societies. Then we also have some neurobiological evidence showing that there's a part of the brain that uh, that uh, lights up in reaction to moral decision making. There's a there's a part of the prefrontal cortex as well as the amygdala, which is in the midbrain, that are involved in moral decision making. And what else did I want to say about that? Well, yeah. And so all these things converge, give us converging evidence that there is some sort of objectivity to morality. But I was saying it might be that morality is domain relative, which is within its own sphere. There are some objective objective principles involved. So, in any case, that was my argument for why I don't think it's completely relative. However, I do concede that the arguments have been rather convincing that it is relative, despite the hundreds and hundreds of arguments that try to give convincing counter arguments to why morality isn't, why there's objectivity, whether these were religious arguments, um, logical arguments, like formal arguments, or religious arguments, empirical arguments, or transcendental arguments. Um, Obviously, the empirical arguments uh, talk about the fact that there's no independent state of affairs where you can point to an event and say that that is moral or immoral. So they got that right, pretty much. That kind of defeats all these other formal arguments and transcendental arguments. um, there's even been attempted like mathematical arguments for morality, and I'm not kidding. Like, and of course, the weakest of all the arguments for morality has been religious ones, which Grant doesn't understand. But those are the weakest arguments for morality, particularly if particularly if you're going to favor the divine command theory, which is the easiest theory to defeat. That's like the easiest ethical theory for anyone who's taken one class in philosophy to defeat is divine command theory. Like, you don't have to have a degree in philosophy, you don't have to have any background in ethics. One class in philosophy, you learn how to defeat the divine command theory. It's only churchies who think it's a good theory. You have to literally be like a, a, a religious delusional person to think that that's a good theory, because anyone who's taken one class in philosophy can defeat the divine command theory. And so in my early on in the live stream, I, I talked about different subjective theories of ethics, which is one, the granddaddy of them all, ethical subjectivism, which basically says there's no truth value to any ethical statement, right? Um, but that they're, um, but then I also give some varieties of other ethical theories that have utterly failed, and part of them failing is because they're subjective, or that they just can't be universalized that everyone can practice them and it leads to moral behavior. So the first one I mentioned about 30, 40 minutes ago was emotivism. Emotivism was championed by the logical positivists in the early 20th century. Emotivism was the viewpoint that em- ethical statements were basically an expression of your uh, your emotions or feelings on any given state of affairs. To say that something is wrong or that something is right is basically just it was basically just a convoluted way of saying you like this or you don't like that. And they do have a strong they have a good point. They let's to be fair, a lot of that is true, especially because a lot of people don't distinguish what's moral from what's distasteful from what's merely a social convention. Most people don't make that distinction between what's actually moral, what's just personally distasteful, to what's just a matter of social convention. So the motivists do have that in their favor. However, it's obvious that some things aren't just a matter of you saying I like that or I don't like that. When it comes to certain things like unaliving people, SA, robbery, theft, dishonesty, there are certain things about those that are that are maleficent behavior, regardless whether you like them or not, because some people might like them. um, then the second E of the three E's of ethical theories that fail because of their subjectivity and lack of universality is ethical egoism, which tries to take the basic psychological fact or psychological egoism, which is that people um, act in their own self-interest, um, all things being equal. They take from their viewpoint that people ought to act in their self-interest to be ethical. That obviously doesn't work because everyone acting in their own self-interest will not always be mutually beneficial for in society. It's not something that can be universalized, obviously, because different people have interests that contradict others' self-interest and can be quite destructive. That wouldn't work, and it becomes quite subjective. What would be in some people's self-interest and other people's self-interest. Um, so yeah, ethical egoism doesn't work. It commits the is ought fallacy, taken from what is and saying that this is what ought to be. Just because something is a way, just because things are a certain way doesn't mean that they ought to be a certain way. And then the third E of the ethical theories that fails because of their subjectivity and failure to be universalized is existentialism. Existentialism the takes the viewpoint from nihilists that there's no purpose to life, and then from there we have freedom of choice, and it's those those free choices that we make that are our ethical decisions. That doesn't work. For similar reasons that egoism doesn't work. That you know the individual choices people freely make don't always make them the best ethical choices, the best moral choices. So those are the three ethical theories that fail because of their subjectivity. And then the granddaddy of them all, ethical subjectivism. And again, there's divine command theory, which fails, that anyone can learn in one day of philosophy. That fails. No, it's not free topics day, BSK. I stated today is this topic is talking merely about whether is morality relative, because I'm basing this off this debate I had with someone a week ago. So that's the topic. So I've stated it 40 minutes ago, and then I've just brought it back to summarize. So there shouldn't be anyone confused about what I'm arguing about, because I've stated it twice, and we've already went through the why divine command theory doesn't work. So we can we can have it out from here. But those again went over ethical subjectivism and the three E's of the three E's within meta ethics that don't work. We went over divine command theory. Then I gave you my own view of the viewpoint that I favor, which is social contractarianism. Social contractarianism, although proposed by John Rawls in a new version called Justice as Fairness, which is the name of the book. Well, his first book was called A Theory of Justice, which is a very heady book. So he reworked that book and modified it into a smaller, more digestible portion called Justice as Fairness. I recommend that to anyone who's interested in political philosophy or contractarianism. But contractarianism goes all the way back to the European Enlightenment, to people of the likes of Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes in his seminal book, The Leviathan, argued for contractarianism. He saw a good government. What he calls the Leviathan is basically a good government. A good, like, we make certain sacrifices for the better of society, and in doing so ensure a good government. That's the Leviathan. The only the only part that I and many others would disagree with Thomas Hobbes is he believes that any government, even a tyrannical government, is better than chaos, than better than living in a pre-industrial society. As he saw it, pre-industrial societies were short, nasty, and brutish. His exact words: short, nasty, and brutish. Living in these and like basically he saw people in pre-industrial societies living in constant tribal warfare, and he was actually pretty on point with that. When you look at the history of when you look at you know what we can recollect of prehistoric events, people were pretty much in a constant state of tribal warfare. However, where a lot of us would disagree with Thomas Hobbes and his version of contractarianism is saying that even a tyrannical government is better than no government at all, because a tyrannical government, in its efforts to maintain the social order, can be just as violent and destructive as as tribal warfare, if if not if not close to it. So that's where I think a lot of us would disagree with Thomas Hobbes. But for the most part, he was right that living within conforming to a government structure is better than living in a pre-industrial society where we didn't have government, where basically it was the strong survives. And the problem with that is, even if you are strong, you're not always going to be strong. You will age. So, and if you're a woman, then what else do you do? Like, so half of half of humanity is just prey to the other half, and then even the strongest will eventually wither and age and be then victims themselves. So, not a good way to go. um, so that is social contractarianism in its naive form. Like I said, the more sophisticated form was the one that John Rawls proposed back in the 70s or 80s. And he made political philosophy a respectable discipline within academic philosophy again. So much so that even people in law and government will often cite his work. Um, and again, there's many other ethical theories in meta ethics. There's utilitarianism. I'm one of those folks that dislikes utilitarianism. Um, it's a form of consequentialist ethics. Consequentialist ethics are ethics in which the foreseeable consequences of our decisions dictate what is ethical and what isn't. The problem is there's always many unforeseen consequences to any decisions we make and judgments. That's why consequentialism generally fails. But in the particular aspect of utilitarianism, most aspects of utilitarianism fail to be good ethical theories because they run afoul of of a scenario where um, something that may be good for the whole may be bad for an individual. If it's if you can do something cruel and unjust to an individual to appease the masses is not a good thing. That's the problem with that Game of Thrones scenario. So even if it did work, that killing the princess would have ensured their victory against the bastard of Winterfell, then it still wouldn't have been the right thing to do because commanding you to kill an innocent person to save everyone else is morally dubious. So most utilitarianism fails that, which is why it's not a good theory. There's only two versions of utilitarianism that work, and so there's two main versions. There's three versions of utilitarianism, but those two can be has so many different versions of them. I won't even get into it. But so you have hedonistic utilitarianism, which is basically guided by the pleasure principle, pleasure versus pain principle. Whatever, whatever, whatever increases the most pleasure for people is the ethical thing. Whatever increases the most pain to people is the unethical thing. Hedonistic utilitarianism is just bad ethical theory just off the bat. That should be obvious. Then there's rule utilitarianism and act utilitarianism. And then they get very convoluted because there's nuances amongst both rule and act utilitarianism. But rule utilitarianism is works on different rules of what what leads to the the most good in society for the largest number of people. Act utilitarianism is how you actually decide things that lead to um, the most happiness for the largest number of people. It become both rule and act utilitarianism basically turn into a moral calculus, and obviously there are some people who consider utilitarianism a more rational approach to ethical decisions because it just becomes a matter of numbers. This will save the most amount of people. This will save the least amount of people. We see that in the hypothetical situation with the trolley uh, problem. Like, okay, if you are at a cross in a on a railroads where there's a lever, and if you hit the switch, it will only run over one person. But if you don't hit the switch, it'll run over three people. What's the decision to make? And that's the trolley problem, and it works on people's view of whether they think a more deciding deciding moral decisions based on a moral calculus is the way to make moral decisions or not. And it becomes very inventive as it comes along. Different people have expounded on different hundreds of, if not thousands, of different type of hypothetical trolley problems. They'll switch it up. They'll say, well, what if that one person is your parent or your child, as opposed to the other three people or five people on the track just being complete strangers. And it becomes a whole bunch of it becomes more of a intuition pump than an actual like guide to make moral decisions. So hold on, guys. I think I might have a guest here. That's probably getting calls. Give me one. Nope, don't see anyone. But I may have to go. Um, don't see too many people getting into this topic. But I will warn you now, if you try to jump into the subject on another topic, I'm going to completely ignore you because you had your dates in the light today to do it. So I think I'm in this here, but I'll give it a few seconds. Oh, nope. The person in my door was just some salesperson. Good. I'm glad I didn't waste time answering that. Extended clip says, thank you. Um, you're welcome. Are you thanking me for ending this, or you ended it, or you thanking me for for the actual topic? Either way is fine. I don't. It doesn't matter. Extended clips. But if you're thanking me for bringing up this topic, very welcome. If you're thanking me for ending it, again, you're welcome. um, uh, for the info, okay, no problem. Hopefully you can watch it once I end this. You can watch this in a replay so you can catch everything that I said, and it links to some previous live streams I did from last week. So I like to do philosophy topics, but I try to keep it very basic. I don't get into. A lot of people don't know that uh, philosophy is actually like very intense academic discipline. They can get into very convoluted arguments and concepts. So I try to keep things at a very basic level that anyone can jump into. But if people want to know more, I'm more than happy to give them uh, like literature that they can read on their own. Like I said, one is Moral Minds by Mark Hauser. I believe he's the author. If not, that is the title of the book, though, Moral Minds. If people want to know why I was saying that there's some objectivity to morality that is not completely relative, this comes from a scientific point of view, not a religious point of view. If people want to know about social contractarianism, which is my own viewpoint, they can go to Justice is Fairness by John Rawls, or his first book, one they call Theory of Justice, which is a much more difficult book. Um, or they can go to The Roots of Social Contractarianism, written by Thomas Hobbes, called The Leviathan. If people want to get into Kantian ethics, they can read his Critique of Practical Reason, or um, uh, there's a smaller book that on his stuff, talking about, I guess, the categorical imperative. If people want to get into Plato and in it how Socrates defeats divine command theory, they can go to those old Platonic uh, books. One is the what is his main one? Is it called the State? No, but yeah, I'll think of that later. Where they can go into Aristotle and he teaches on his virtue ethics, which is called the Nicomachean ethics. His Aristotle's view of ethics was virtue ethics, which I don't like. But and it becomes again, virtue ethics becomes subjective because it not the virtues themselves are subjective, although you can argue that as well. It becomes subjective based Virtue ethics becomes subjective because it becomes subjective which virtues you choose to uphold versus which ones you choose um, um, to ignore. Like, should virtue be upheld as a should bravery be upheld as a virtue over rationality, or so it does become subjective which virtues you decide to make ethical principles and which ones you don't. But that's the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. Then you can read Ethical Subjectivism and A Treatise on Human Nature by David Hume. Uh, what else? Some good stuff you can read on utilitarianism. I think it's called On Utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. Then there's another one on hedonistic utilitarianism by Jeremy Bentham. Uh, what else did I discuss? And there's a bunch of ethical theories that I haven't even talked about. One of my own professors, he came up with his own consequentialist ethics. Dr. Stanley Jack Odell, he didn't make a book, but he wrote an article on it. It's called Folk-Based Practice Consequentialist Consequentialism. Excuse me, Folk-Based Practice Consequentialist Ethics. He wrote an entire paper on that, so people can read that as well. Um, if people want to know why utilitarianism doesn't work, they can read up on Emmett Till and see why the Emmett Till scenario is often a defeater to most utilitarianism. Okay. And if people want to know more about the different meta ethical theories out there, again, there's consequentialism, there's deontological theory, there's virtue ethics, there's divine command theory, there's ethical subjectivism, there's social contractarianism, and um, and then there's like naturalist uh, naturalistic ethics, which kind of goes, which kind of bases ethical decisions more on how people actually behave, looking at um, behavioral research, natural naturalistic ethics. So those are the main meta ethical theories. If people want to know more, extended clip says I'm reading the theory of moral sentiments now. Okay, is that by David Hume? Moral theory of moral sentiments. That sounds very Humean. Brain Dead Boy says, "Yo, are you religious?" No, and I'm pretty sure you asked me that last time, bro. But no. And even if I was, that would be independent of my what ethical theories I would embrace, because again, ethics predates organized religion. Adam Smith. Oh, okay. Yep. That sounds about right. I think that was his second book because his first book was on the wealth of nations, and then I think his follow-up was a theory of moral sentiments. He was actually influenced by David Hume, I believe. That's why I got them confused. Um, there was a there was definitely they were contemporaries of each other, Adam Smith and David Hume. That's and I think his theory on moral sentiments um, influenced David Hume in his book on a treatise of human nature. So good stuff. You see, yeah, Wealth of Nations facts. Bring Their Boy says, yeah, I'm not religious either. Church has too much control over things. Nowadays, not really. I can't really say that, at least not here in America. I don't know where you live, Brain Dead Boy. But yeah, here, what controls? the what makes the most decisions here is a political oligarchy that favors a neoliberalistic agenda. Not to mention, we have this gerontocracy. We're run by a bunch of old people who act like they're going to be here forever and forget that they have children, grandchildren, great grandchildren who are going to inherit this mess that they've created. And I'm speaking specifically about baby boomers and some of the silent generation as well. Extended clip says I study Stoic philosophy. That's cool. Stoic philosophy is a wide breadth of stuff because there's many different authors and viewpoints within Stoic philosophy. Like you have people like Marcus Aurelius, but then you have the some pre-Socratic philosophers, or not pre-Socratic, but philosophers who were contemporaries of Socrates, who were also Stoics as well. I find that the Hellenistic philosophers offer the best interpretation of Stoicism than the Roman Marcus Aurelius does. I I mean I would say more or less the Roman philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and others kind of just copied the Hellenistic philosophers. But I didn't even broach Stoicism as looking at it as a form of ethics. But you can definitely look at that consideration as well. Definitely. But yeah, I think that's legitimate. I didn't mean to be rude to Grant earlier, but he was going to try to keep this as he wanted to make this a religious debate, and I just wasn't going to feed into that. I gave him some follow up to what he was saying, but I wasn't going to keep going over and over again the same thing just because that's something he was interested in. Again, anyone who's taken one class in philosophy can literally defeat the divine command theory because it's a very sophomoric way of telling people how to behave morally, and that's independent of whether you are religious or not. It just becomes a matter of common sense argument. It you to try to make these complicated arguments in favor of divine command theories was called committing the philosopher's fallacy. What's the what's the philosopher's fallacy, or committing the philosopher's fallacy, is when you try to use complex uh, complex arguments or formal arguments where common sense reasoning will do. That's called committing the philosopher's fallacy, and I'm not going to feed into that. Like I said, it doesn't take one day of someone doing a class in philosophy, not one semester or one course, one class. It takes one class of philosophy to realize divine command theory is juvenile. So I'm not. So what wasn't going to feed into that. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up stoicism because I did forget that one. I did. I intentionally it didn't include virtue ethics just because I don't find it very convincing. But I should have when I was talking about subjective ethics, because the problem with virtue ethics is that it becomes subjective which virtues you uphold and which ones you disdain. So, but other than that, I don't know who's still in here. I don't know if it's extended clips. I don't know if it's brain dead or someone else. But it looks like I only have one person left. So unless someone else wants to make any comments, I'm going to be out. But I hope people can watch this on a replay and appreciate it. Um, but since I gave a full topic to this, and this is the third time I've done so, if someone comes back in another day asking these same questions, I'm gonna say, hey, I'm gonna refer you back to the stream or the streams before it. Extended clip says stoicism serves as a supplemental mechanism as well. Well, yeah, stoicism. Stoicism, like when I was talking about existentialism earlier, isn't just an ethical theory. It also is um, a theory in metaphysics as well. Um, but for the purposes of this topic, I only stuck to its ethical roots. And same, so I'm gonna treat Stoicism the same way. I'm just stick to its ethical suppositions, um, and not get into its more some of its um, ontological assertions. Ontological meaning the study of what things exist, which is a, a discipline within metaphysics, if not the whole game of metaphysics itself. But um, like I said, it my my problem with Stoicism is I don't take I in analytic philosophy we really don't limit ourselves to ancient philosophy because you know ancient philosophy doesn't have much relevance to contemporary society other than for historical purposes. Like there are certain insights that come from ancient philosophy that we still can concede today. Like I said, the fact that back 2,500 years ago, Socrates had already defeated divine command theory. That's something we've known to this day. So it's not something we have to go beyond one class to really expound on because there's not much there. He defeated it back then, and there's no need to keep going over it today, 2,500 years later. Um, but other than for historical reference to say, hey, we don't need to go over this. This was handled back then. No need to reinvent the wheel. But I think Stoicism falls under the same sort of situation where there are some good insights that come from Stoicism, but I don't think it's no longer a fluid system of thought. It's more of a historical, um, mostly historical philosophy now. But I get some people might get inspiration from it, maybe because they're red pill or just because it's trendy, and because there's right now a lot of self-help gurus who push stoicism, which is another reason why I find it kind of dubious because stoicism has become trendy nowadays. So anything that becomes trendy, I'm gonna kind of back away from because the 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 self-help guru version of stoicism is very unlike the way it was actually taught and understood, and it's really not a shortcut to success. So I guess that's all I have to say about that. But did anyone else have anything to say besides that? If not, I think I'm gonna go fix a go fix a snack, and I'm gonna be about my business. Oh, I'm gonna return my call that I got twice. See what my cousin wanted. It might have been actually something important. Um, but appreciate it, extended clips. If you haven't already, give me a like, please, and a subscribe for all of you out there. People watching this in its rebroadcast. Give me a like and a subscribe. You can share the video as well. You can hit the bell icon for notifications when I upload a future video or live or do a new live stream. For those who want to support my channel, um, I have memberships available on three different tiers, starting at $2.99. Also, you can drop me a super. Um, you can drop me a super thanks. And during live streams, people can drop super chats where it'll show your donation and highlight your comments so that it will rise above everyone else's so that I can address it. So, which is important because often I'm like 5 or 10 minutes behind the chat room because I address everyone's comments. So if you drop a super chat, I'll immediately see it even if I'm 10 minutes behind in the chat room. Or you can drop a super sticker and I'll see that as well. Either one of those work fine. But after this is no longer a live broadcast, then you can also drop me a super thanks, which I'll immediately get. Or you can go to my Cash App at $ Page Enterprises LLC, or $ Just A Contrarian, all one word, and you can contribute there. And I have a buy me a coffee as well because I drink a lot of coffee. So if you guys have been watching my live stream since earlier, you saw that I actually drink a lot of coffee. This was my third coffee of the day, my iced coffee here. A little bit of espresso with creamer and cinnamon and sugar. It's mostly melted ice now, but um, it's all good. um, Other than that, that's it, guys. Appreciate it. Um, Feel free to leave any thoughts or questions in the comment section, and I'll get to them as long as they are appropriate and coherent. All right, guys. Thank you.